Thanks, Governor Dayton. Thanks, Kate. Congratulations, Mary Lee. And thank you for your efforts. Mary Lee now belongs to an elite club. Governor Dayton beat me to the punch in naming those people, but I'd like to acknowledge the other Rule Harmon Award recipients who are here with us tonight. We are grateful for them. Senator Dave Durenberger over here, if you could just raise your hand one more time. And Martin Kellogg, again, right up front. Martin. And now I'd like to call Mike back up to the podium to introduce tonight's featured speaker.
Well, thank you, Brett. It's really an honor to be able to do this. And before we started this evening, Brett had already worked with Gordon, and Brett is really excited about the presentation tonight. And when Brett's excited about something, it's obvious, and we're in for a real treat. As we gather here tonight, we are in the middle of a large and noisy urban setting. Had we been here in 1893, when this Town and Country Golf Club began, it would have been a lot more country than town. Cows would have been heard on the golf course. This was actually a farm. And certainly there was no city sounds. And had we been here 200 years ago, we would have heard one ever-present sound, the Falls of St. Anthony, a mile upstream on the Mississippi River. Even though that sound continues, it is now unheard. Our soundscape is ever-changing and not for the better. Tonight we take a needed break from the background noise. We hear the sounds of silence, or rather the sound of 1 square inch of silence, from renowned acoustic ecologist and author Gordon Hempton. What can one say by way of an introduction? Gordon has circled the globe 3 times in pursuit of Earth's natural sounds, and his work has earned him awards including an Emmy and an award from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as accolades from the American Museum of Natural History, the Rolex Awards for Enterprise, the Charles A. Lindbergh Fund, and national media from Time and Newsweek to PBS and NPR. He is the author of the book, 1 Square Inch of Silence, One Man's Search for Silence in a Noisy World. He resides at the edge of Olympic National Park in a yurt. Gordon acknowledges that if he was asked to choose his favorite sound in the world, it would not be easy. And he has a beautiful passage. He's a great writer. If asked to choose my favorite sound in the world, I doubt that I could do it easily. If forced, I might say it's the dawn chorus of songbirds, the sound of the rising sun as it circles the globe. But that would disregard the murmur of winged insects as heard over many square miles in the Kalahari. And if that were my favorite sound, that would ignore the hoot of an owl, the way it bounces off the cypress trees in Louisiana, and also ignore the clang of a church bell after it is echoed down the narrow stone streets of an Austrian village. If I had to supply a single answer to that question, my favorite sound in the world would be the sound of anticipation. Tonight, we all share that sense of anticipation. Please join me in welcoming Gordon Hempton.
Thank you, Mike. Wonderful introduction. Those are some of my very, very favorite sounds, as well as the sound of people here, the sound of your smiles. This is the first time that I've given a talk to a conservation group, believe it or not. Usually it's to audiologists, people concerned about hearing, people concerned about silence, but almost in a theoretical way. But now to people who know what I know, which is that very special sense of wilderness. I've been lucky that I get to travel to some of the most remote places on planet Earth. But I think even luckier that I get to meet those who grow up in those wilderness places. Years ago, I found myself in the Kalahari Desert. I was there to record birdsong. And this was part of a much larger project that I was circling the globe, recording the sounds of the rising sun. And I would go back later in the studio and I'd sew this global concert together so we could all hear it, and we will later in the program. But the important thing is that I had to have a good recording from each location. The big problem in the Kalahari, it was the 7th year of a drought. Very little life, very few songbirds. But fortunately, I had Bertus. Bertus spent every day of his life in the Kalahari, and we had 2 words in common: lions and no lions. So we searched. We searched for days to hear the bird song and to record and fulfill all this. And I can remember seeing a black cloud in the sky, and it released this silver waterfall. And as it descended to the hot, triple-digit desert floor, only a few drops would touch the ground. But then on the horizon, I saw a line of green, a thin line of green. And I knew that green meant life, meant song. So I directed the driver, Dr. Liversedge, to take us in the Land Rover to the green. And he does. I stop. I listen to the bird song. I begin to get out, and Bertus, lions. I look around. There are no lions. I'm hot. There are the bird songs I've come all this distance to record. How does Bertus know? I asked Dr. Liversedge. He begins this great big, long 10, 15-minute conversation, and he turns to me and he says, Bertus doesn't know how he knows, but he knows. So there's an element of doubt. I open up the Land Rover. I take 10 steps into the bush, and I'm met by 5 lions. So slowly I backtrack. I get back in the Land Rover with new respect for Bertus. We go on. We record Bushman Fountain, which turned out to be great. 2,000-year-old site that water has bubbled to the surface of this otherwise parched desert, and the birds are there. Okay, mission accomplished. Bertus asked me through Dr. Liversedge, is there anything I want to bring back to America? And I said, yes. As a matter of fact, there is. I'd like to bring a magic stick back for my 4-year-old son. Now, I wasn't sure how magic was going to translate into Bertus' life, but apparently it did, because Bertus knew where one grew. We hop back in the Land Rover, and we drive to the exact same spot where I saw 5 lions. Bertus begins to get out, and I erupt, lions! Bertus, no lions. How does he know? And then another big, long conversation, of course, ends with Bertus still does not know how he knows, but Bertus knows. And Bertus got out. I got out with him. We went in, we cut the magic stick, and on our way out, we saw the 5 lions up on the hill, and they had eaten. Ladies and gentlemen, Bertus is a true listener. This sound transformed my life. I didn't know I was going to be the sound tracker. I had planned on becoming a plant pathologist. It was my paint-by-number life. I even thought I was a listener. I knew that listening meant focusing my attention on what was important, even before I had heard it, filtering out all those unimportant sounds, in the background usually, even before I bothered to give it any attention. But on my drive to graduate school, and tired, I pulled over to the side of the road, walked into a field to get some rest. This was the first time that I truly listened. And as that thunder rolled into the unseen corners of that valley, I realized there were unseen valleys in my life, and I knew that I had to change. So I did. I dropped out of graduate school, took a job as a bike messenger with only one purpose: to become a better listener, which is still my purpose today. I had a master, though, a real dummy, no brain, a human microphone system that replicates human hearing, because the problem is that I had a brain. And that brain was telling me what was worthwhile and what wasn't worthwhile, where the microphone system without a brain listens to all sounds with equal importance. So, when I listened through the microphone, I became instantly transformed into a true listener. When I took this microphone into wilderness areas, I heard messages. Another system error. Let's see if we can do this again. Now, some people hear this as a recording of coyotes, and they would be right in part. They're a pair of coyotes that I had gotten to know over the course of a summer. I watched them raise their young, watched them teach them to jump on a clump of grass, gobble down a field mouse, do the same thing over again all summer long. But now the young were gone, and these two had their lives back, and I believe that they were celebrating. I never heard them sing like this before or since. But some people don't hear this as a recording of coyotes. They hear this as a recording of silence made audible by the coyotes because the echoes are so ever expanding. And taking the microphone system to something as simple as melting snow comes another message. This is unedited. John Muir writes in the 1800s the phrase, "snow melting into music." And when I read his words, I thought, oh, I wish I thought of that. What poetic licenses. Of course, it can't be true. And I asked myself, when did I ever really listen to snow melt? And this was my first recording of melting snow. So these messages that I began to receive by becoming this true listener through the microphone system added up to listening more and more messages until the big message reached me, which is Earth is a solar-powered jukebox, which simply means the more sunlight that falls onto the surface of the Earth, the more energy there is to cycle into the bioacoustic system, and the louder it plays, provided that the solar panels, the leaves, are there. So we're going to take a little tour of planet Earth, beginning with the equator and maximum sunlight, and that means maximum loudness. The Amazon. Quite a bit of diversity, too. And so we'll go a little bit further north now to Central America and Belize. Still a lot of solar energy. Fair amount of diversity. But now let's go ahead and jump up to the temperate latitudes in the state of Georgia. I love those Georgia songbirds. You can hear the forest acoustics begin to happen. And then we'll go to my home state of Washington. The western meadowlark. And this explains why I live in Washington state, because it's not just about sound, but it's about the space and the revealing of the place. But let's head this way towards Minnesota to Grasslands National Park, just over the border from Montana. Ooh, well, we begin to tune ourselves on the Solar-Powered Jukebox. This is the last grassland area in North America that has more than 15 minutes during daylight hours without noise pollution. And now to Minnesota, one of my favorite places, recorded in April. Everybody, your state of Minnesota has one of the last 12 remaining quiet places in the United States. But not one place in the world has been designated off limits to noise pollution. Our model of Earth as a solar-powered jukebox helps to explain why the Earth has become so tremendously noisy today, because fossil fuels is really ancient sunlight. And we can see in this nighttime view of Earth from space the noisiest place on the planet, especially the United States and Western Europe. And we might assume that the dark spaces are quiet places. But that's not always true. This is one of those dark places, the town of Colstrip, Montana, one of the world's largest mining operations of ancient sunlight. And this is a recording from Colstrip at the distance we're observing. And those 4 large stacks amount to flutes that play low-frequency noise into the environment and literally consume more than 1,000 square miles of what otherwise would simply be the sounds of nature. Quiet. Just quiet. The time to be alone in nature and think your own thoughts, or not, has become an endangered species, completely unprotected. Meet Rebecca, one of the best listeners I know. In fact, when this picture was taken, we were engaged. Although, oddly enough, we're not. Life happens. Life goes on. She's deaf, however, born completely deaf in her right ear, profound hearing loss in her left ear. Today, she's fitted with 2 cochlear implants and has no perception of music. Part of the romance of our relationship is this was a collision of two worlds. I had spent weeks recording things like the solitary flight of a mosquito as feature material. And I was surprised to learn that Rebecca did not even know that water of a stream sounded differently from rain, sounded differently from a waterfall or the ocean beach, because she only knows about sound from what the hearing world tells her, and we take it all for granted. Well, Rebecca and I had a lot to talk about. So we were walking along the ocean beach at Olympic National Park, having one of our conversations about deaf meeting hearing and listening to each other, except I couldn't listen to her. It was difficult because the crashing surf was making her words difficult for me to understand. She had no trouble understanding me. Absolutely no trouble. She heard every word because she was reading my lips. So I said, Rebecca, how do you read lips so well? She said, well, it's not how most hearing people think. I'm not watching your lips, forming the words, stringing sentences together, and putting it together that way. I have to put everything into the larger context. So while she was telling me this, I was looking over her shoulder and the snow-capped peaks of the Olympics, and I was reminded of the words of John Muir. Now, the snow in the Olympics, of course, we know is going to melt. It's going to go down the streams, changing its voice all the time, and then eventually reach the ocean and put it into the larger context. Muir writes his description of a winter storm in the North Sierra Nevadas. I drifted on through the midst of this passionate music in motion, across many a glen, from ridge to ridge, often halting in the lee of a rock for shelter or to gaze and listen. Even when the grand anthem had swelled to its highest pitch, I could distinctly hear the varying tones of individual trees, spruce and fir and pine and leafless oak. Each was expressing itself in its own way, singing its own song and making its own peculiar textures. The profound bass of the naked branches and boles booming like waterfalls, the quick, tense vibrations of pine needles, now rising to a shrill whistling hiss, now falling to a silky murmur, the rustling of laurel groves in the dells, and the keen metallic click of leaf on leaf. All this was heard in easy analysis when the attention was calmly bent. So I asked Rebecca, you want to learn how to lip read nature? And she didn't know what to think, but it's really pretty easy. When it comes to needle leaf, trees and grasses, the shorter the needle, the higher the pitch. The longer the needle, the lower the pitch. And with grasses, there's a whipping sound. Now the short needle pine. And the long needle. And when it comes to deciduous trees, it's mainly a matter of season. Soon, hopefully, after our snow finishes melting into music around here and the new fresh emergent leaves, they are nearly silent. And as those solar panels on the Solar-Powered Jukebox begin to expand and firm up during the summer months and reach their maximum rustle in the fall, and then finally, after the leaves drop, the roar of the naked branches and boles. And when it comes to reading the lips of water, it's really quite a bit like our own voice. We have the babbling infancy of youth. We'll move on to boisterous tones. Midlife changes. If you're lucky, meandering old age. Most waters of the world that don't evaporate reach the ocean, where the ocean is a drum. Beating the tunes of huge weather changes far This surf sounds dramatically different than this, which we can see by the beach. All those cobblestones are the notes. But in the center is the biggest treat of all to my ears, which is nature's largest violin. That is the Sitka spruce, the same wood that's used to craft violins and other acoustic instruments. And right now, that log is vibrating in a secret symphony, just as the result of being exposed to the roar of the surf. So sit back and relax to this 3.5-minute concert, of which we're going to start outside the log and then move in. actually